polypede works here. So there's been a lot of ticketed talk about why the Gorosei don't go down, especially from when we see Saturn regenerate and how all the Gorosei regenerate in chapter quadruple 1, right? So here's the thing that I have come to as to why this is. If Devil Fruits are what Vegapunk says they are, which means they are the culminations of the wishes of humans, right? The physical manifestation of what people want and desire, right? All these different ideals coming together in the forms of various Devil Fruits, okay? So, thinking of it like that, the reason why I think mythical Zoans are probably the strongest type of Devil Fruit in One Piece is because of this. The difference between mythical Zoans, Paramecia, and Logia is that with a mythical Zoan, you have the opportunity to become something that doesn't exist. What do I mean by that? Well, even when you are a Paramecia and you are embodying a concept, you are just a human with the power of a concept, whether that be surgery or a force like magnetism or vibration or negativity, etc. You are simply a human with that ability. When you are a Logia, you, though very close to a mythical Zoan, but you are still a physical concept or a physical experience in the case of Teach because he's darkness. But like fire, darkness, lightning, you are the human experience of these things, but you're still a physical thing. You still exist in the world as a actual concept, much like vibrations and the various powers you find in Paramecias, right? Then you get to Zoans. Zoans are interesting because with most cases, Zoans are the physical manifestation of a human's ideal of an animal. So in Lucius' case, he has the power of a leopard. He is the human ideal of a leopard, meaning he is a creature that can perish. Because, of course, people hunt leopards. They know that leopards can expire. They can pass away. Same thing with ancient Zoans. Ancient Zoans are just the human perception of animals that have been long extinct. Though we know from Little Garden that some of these extinct animals actually still exist. Perhaps even down to the spiders, you know, the fruit that Black Maria has, because I believe we do find spiders on Little Garden. I'm not sure if that's an anime thing or not. I'll probably put it up here in the box beside me if I found it in the manga. But that's the thing. These are still real creatures that exist. Thanks to Little Garden, we know that these things are mythical. Dinosaurs and ancient spiders and the like all do exist, at least somewhere in the world, right? That's why Little Garden is kind of in hindsight so important. The thing with mythical Zoans is that based on how One Piece is set up, mythical creatures don't exist. The closest we get is the concept of there being dragons. But even still, the dragons that we see are Western dragons. And the only dragon fruits that we have that aren't dinosaurs are those of the fish fruit variety, meaning that Kaido's fruit is a fish fruit. The reason why Kaido's fruit is a fish fruit, not because of what he turns into, it's because of the legend that the fruit embodies. His fruit embodies the legend of the carp reaching the top of the waterfall to become a dragon. The reason why mythical Zoans are so powerful because all of them are like that. Mythical Zoans are just creatures that embody parables and legends. They don't exist anywhere in the world. Therefore, when you embody the concept that they represent, jumping over the waterfall, being a joyous person that spreads liberation, or whatever entails of being a big pig is for like Warcry. I don't know what that's about. Or a skeletal horse. Don't know what that's about. But whatever. The point is that when you embody the concept that the creature is based in, what kind of built the creature as a concept to tell amongst humans for over generations upon generations, when you become that concept and you awaken, of course you wouldn't be able to die, because concepts don't die. You see, how can you kill something that doesn't necessarily exist? You can't kill a story. You can't kill a parable. You can't kill a lesson. That's what mythical Zoans are. They are representations of parables and lessons and stories. The only way you can kill a story is that if you don't tell it. So that's why mythical Zoans have such high regenerative capabilities. That's why I don't think any of what the Gorosei are doing are technology based, or that their immortality is technology based. I don't think that at all. I think the reason why they can live so long and the reason why their regenerative abilities are so potent is because they are now conceptually stories. They are the embodiment of things that don't necessarily exist physically, but they are things that are essentially parable stories. So when you become this story, your physicality now goes beyond what would be perceived by mortals. You become something other than just the animal or a figure or whatever. You are now the physical embodiment of whatever story or parable or lesson brought this beast into existence. This goes for Luffy. This does go for Kaido, but Kaido is a very interesting point because Kaido himself, despite having the fruit for so long, never lived up to being the carp that jumped over the waterfall. So he just got the baseline abilities that you get from eating the fish fruit model Azure Dragon. Whereas with Yamato eating the big mouth wolf fruit, that animal is a legendary protector of Wano. That was her whole mission in being like Odin, was to protect Wano because she loves Wano. And because of that, presumably, she too could be awakened because we do see this sash around her, the Harigamo. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the reason why the Gorosei and Luffy seem untouchable and unkillable is because in being a mythical Zoan, you are not a mortal creature anymore. You are in fact ethereal, because the basis of the creature that you have fully become in being an awakened Zoan that is mythical is that you are now the parable, the lesson, the story. So I will say, as a side note, the odd man out amongst the five elders, the Gorosei, is most likely Jupiter, which is why he is the youngest. Based on what we have seen so far, the sandworm that he can become has no extra powers. It has no extra abilities that you would consider being a part of those that a mythical Zoan would have. So far, he seems to be just a normal large worm, which means most likely that his fruit amongst all the Gorosei is an ancient Zoan as opposed to a mythical Zoan. He could be a worm that maybe existed in a sandy country like Alabasta in the past. I don't know. But given how One Piece animals can be quite large and quite strange, I wouldn't be surprised. But that would explain why he is the youngest, because he probably is mortal, unlike the other four elders. And with that being said, give me your thoughts.
Before we get into anything, I just want to say there will be spoilers from Marineford and the majority of Wano. So if you aren't caught up, please catch up, because it's a wild ride and I think you would enjoy. So a friend and I were talking recently about what Whitebeard's awakening probably was. And after doing a little research myself, I have come to the conclusion that this very well might be the case. So, what I did know, however, after doing a little wiki diving, I didn't know what he does during Marineford is actually named. Like, he actually has a cornucopia of attacks, like a lot of them. So, we're going to go through them one by one until we get to the point of this video. So, going down the list, we have Seaquake. Seaquake is the first thing we see Whitebeard do when he pulls up out of the pool in front of the Marines in Marineford on the Moby Dick. The coating pops off, everyone's amazed, yada yada. It's really neat, but he cracks the air, right? Takes that pose, the big studly man pose. He punches the air with both fists, the air cracks, and then 2 tsunamis are summoned after the vibration cracks go through most of the landscape. But yes, 2 tsunamis are summoned by the aftershock. Then those tsunamis are frozen by Kuzan. I think this is also the ability you see him use most of the time, like when he's frozen by Kuzan later on, and he just breaks out of the ice, or when Roger is poaching Odin in Odin flashback, Whitebeard gets kind of testy and quakes the entire sea around where the 2 crews are chilling at. Okay, then the more focused attack version of the Seaquake is called the Severe Earthquake, which is just a simple punch forward into a target using the same technique as the Seaquake. So a sort of wild shockwave, but pressed against an opponent. Then we start getting into the meat and potatoes of our topic today. The next attack is called the Hypocenter attack. A hypocenter is the underground origin point of a earthquake. So it's an actual real thing, which is different from an epicenter where you actually feel the earthquake where you're standing. So this takes the form in One Piece in the Tremor Fruits toolkit as a quake bubble, as most of the community has dubbed it as. This quake bubble is the most devastating technique I think we see Whitebeard use, because he uses this most of the time because it's focused, is direct, and it's effective. This quake bubble, this hypocenter attack, has a variant called the Helmet Splitter. The Helmet Splitter is just Whitebeard choke slamming somebody with the quake bubble around their head, and he breaks their headgear and their skull. So yes, that's the Helmet Splitter. Now, the ultimate attack is called Island Shaking, which is basically where Whitebeard just grabs the atmosphere and pulls the air around himself, which causes just a island-wide tremor. That's sort of like the ultimate attack, but not the point of the video. The point of the video is actually an attack that happens earlier in 566, which is called a word I cannot pronounce. I'll put the name on screen. This devastating attack is focused on his Bicento. And unlike the quake bubbles, this attack's depiction is wobbly. Like there's something ethereal about it. There's something different. What's interesting is that we've seen something like this before. Now, late in Wano, during the Onigashima portion of Wano, okay, during where Law and Kid are fighting Big Mom, both Paramecia fruit users, Law and Kid, awaken. Law's awakening, well, one of his awakening abilities, because there are technically 2. One of them is called K-Room, dubbed in some communities as Kroom. Okay, K-Room has Law taking his rune and bestowing it into his blade. This is interesting because both Law and Newgate have never used their weapons as a point of power. Newgate especially. Newgate, for the majority of Marineford, is just punching dudes. With Law, he sets up a rune, and then the blade is just kind of used as a tool of influence in the room. It's never used as a point of power, like a generation point. So in both cases, both Dofus users are using their weapon as a point of power by bestowing their respective abilities to their weapon. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying characters that have these sort of dome generation techniques, like say Rosiante or Bartolomeo, I think we're going to see that their awakened abilities are quite similar to Newgate and Law's, where the awakening is focused around the bestowment of their ability to an object, as opposed to turning the environment into something else or afflicting other things with like a weird aspect of their ability, like what Kid does. I think with these users, the users that create these force fields and domes, I believe their ability is going to be more about focus and bestowment, as opposed to transmogrification or just randomly assigning aspects of their powers to other things, because I believe that's the beauty in both Law and Newgate. Because with Newgate, devastation comes easy, he just kind of quakes everything, but the Hypo Center attack shows a tinge of discipline with Newgate, how he can just take all this destructive power and localize it to a specific area, and then when he bestows his Bicento with this, it's just an extension of this discipline. Same thing with Law. Law is already a very disciplined individual, because in order for his power to even work, he has to have some degree of knowing how to be a doctor. On top of that, in his past, we know he's studied under several members of the Don Quixote family, so he knows several different styles of combat. He knows how to sharpshoot, etc., etc. So this is just a further extension of his discipline, how he can usually take what's quite large, because rooms get big, they get island wide, or even like above island wide, they get pretty big. So to condense what's usually pretty massive down to something very small, and then taking that small thing and bestowing it onto something else, shows a degree of technique and discipline, which is the same thing that Whitebeard is showing by doing what he does with his Bicento, by bestowing such a destructive power to his weapon. And with that, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. If you like stuff like this, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, PaulyP Works. And if you like what you see, I would appreciate your subscription. Thank you so much. See you next time.
PaulyP Works here. So there are a lot of lies told about Roger in the story of One Piece, right? One significant one that we learned kind of early on is that his name isn't Gold Roger, it's Gold D Roger. So when we learn this information, it's very interesting that we learn it from the man himself through Whitebeard's recollection of a conversation that he had with Roger. But I think there's another very significant lie that is kind of hidden in the world of One Piece, that being Roger having a devil fruit. You see, in chapter 1047, we find out that Kaido seemingly says that the power above all powers in this world is Haki, and uses Roger as an example, saying that fruit powers alone can conquer the world. Well, this of course is a lie. Based on what we know about Kaido now, he can be seen as an unreliable narrator. Number one, he was not on Roger's crew. He was on the rival crew, the Rocks Pirates. Number two, Kaido is not an awakened Zoan. Therefore, he does not know the depths of where devil fruits can go, even though he knows the mechanics of what awakening is, as he tells us that as well, but he hasn't done it himself. Therefore, how would he know? Third of all, in terms of Haki, really, when you think about it, he himself doesn't really use the full breadth of what Haki can do, because never does he ever use armament Haki to defend himself, which is why Luffy's Gear 5th abilities kind of just bore through his natural defenses so easily. With that being said, there's another very intricate thing that makes me think that Roger did in fact have a devil fruit, because in the entirety of One Piece, I mean every crew, every organization, they have a symbol. The pirates have a Jolly Roger, the revolutionaries have a flag, and the Marines have a flag, as well as the world government, right? All these flags represents the organization in one way or another, or the leader of that organization. With pirates, and presumably the revolutionaries, I got a video on that, it represents the leader themselves most of the time. So most likely with the revolutionaries, the dragon flag represents something to do with dragon. Luffy's flag represents him wearing the straw hat and that being his treasure, so on and so forth. But on the topic of straw hats, so far we know that Roger is the oldest holder of that particular Straw Hat. But the interesting thing about this is that we have seen Roger twice in very young ages. One when he meets Rayleigh, and another in which he's fighting the Rocks Pirates on God Valley. And in both of those times, his appearance does not reflect his Jolly Roger. His Jolly Roger is that of a skull with a very long, luxurious, seemingly blonde mustache. At least it's blonde in some depictions. So this has nothing to do with Roger at any point in history up until presumably his journey is almost over. Because when we see him meeting Rayleigh, he is baby-faced. He looks like Luffy. When we see him fighting the Rocks Pirates on God Valley, he looks like a slightly older version of Luffy. He has scruffle. He does not have a mustache. But when we see him later on in his career, when he meets Odin, and once Rocks is presumably long since passed, he has a mustache. This is very different than, say, Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, because we know Whitebeard, once he becomes an adult and presumably is in his peak condition in his prime when he is a Rocks pirate, he has his iconic crescent moon shaped mustache. So his whole Jolly Roger makes sense because he's had a mustache from a very young age, right? But Roger seemingly only gets a mustache when he is well past his prime on his last legs, or at least at the very start of his weird illness. So I say that to say that I think this hair growth was due to him eating a Doa fruit, because it's weird in that the Jolly Roger doesn't represent anything about him, nor do we see the Jolly Roger in his early stages of his career when he still has the straw hat. We never see it. So I think what's happening is that either he had the Doa fruit for a long time and said Doa fruit affects hair growth, and we so far have never had a Doa fruit that affects hair. So what if Roger did in fact have a Doa fruit, but he just didn't use it beyond affecting his own appearance? Because two, we know that just like there are some characters who focus only on their Doa fruit power, there are other characters who focus only on Haki or other skills, but still have a Doa fruit. Those characters being like Kinemon or Kaido himself, because Kinemon has a Doa fruit that really isn't useful for fighting in any particular way. The Garb fruit doesn't really facilitate anything to do with the two-sword style. Abilities just don't mesh well together. And with Kaido, it almost seems as if he's using his Zoan abilities as a means to an end to boost his Haki proficiency. Even though he has a lot of abilities as a mythical Zoan, despite being on the seas for a very long time and having his fruit for a very long time, his investment is equivalent to that of early stage Chopper's investment. They're literally on the same level. And why do I say this? Because Kaido has his three forms, and then only when he is drunk, so only when he is under the influence of a stimulant of some sort, that he has alternative forms. So he has his alternative hybrid form and a skinnier version of his full dragon form. This is very similar to early form Chopper, in which he needed the rumble balls in order to access his other transformations, such as arm point and jump point and horn point, etc., etc. So he has as much Doa fruit proficiency as pre-time skip rumble ball using Chopper. The only difference is that he just has more abilities because he's a mythical Zoan. So I say that all to say is that it is very likely, just based on us not seeing Roger's Jolly Roger at the start of his career or even in the middle of his career, we only see it at the end. This most likely means that he has had this sort of hair fruit for all that time, and he uses such a hair fruit to express himself and then expresses the sort of style of his entire organization. And the reason why I think it was that and not say like a Straw Hat Jolly Roger is because out of all this time, and Roger's crew being one of the most documented crews in the One Piece world, somebody would have picked up or called Luffy a copycat if he was using a very similar Jolly Roger to Goldie Roger, if the Straw Hat played any part in Roger's Jolly Roger. So most likely it didn't, and Roger was just using his ability in a way to represent himself and his organization, that being the skull with the long, luxurious mustache. And the reason why we don't see Roger use his ability is because, like I said, like with Kinemon or with Kaido, he just doesn't put that much stock in his ability. He just doesn't use it. He feels, perhaps, as a swordsman, that Haki best suits his skill set as opposed to using his Devil Fruit. Another thing that's super interesting about this is that even though we have not seen a lot of Roger in the story thus far, we have never seen him in water. We have never seen him swim. So based on the fact that we have unreliable narrators and that only truth really comes out when Roger is either talking about himself or presumably when people who knew Roger talk about him, it's safe to say that any rumors around Roger are very fictitious and untrue. Much how, like with Luffy, people who don't know Luffy make up rumors about him. Like in Dressrosa, when the townspeople thought that Luffy was some sort of giant. So, with all that being said, Roger has a Devil Fruit, and I think that Devil Fruit is presumably some sort of hair fruit. Which means, yeah, Roger is a Bobo. This, I promise you, this was not a whole explanation to get to that joke. I am 100% serious, but give me your thoughts.
What if I told you that Boa Hancock, the Pirate Empress, is an awakened Paramecia? So, as you know, awakenings can kind of run the gambit of being just about anything. We have very similar awakenings in both Doflamingo and Katakuri, which we got a video about that coming up very soon. But then we've got sort of weird ones like Law's of Devil Fruit Awakening and Kid's Devil Fruit Awakening. I've done a video about Law's Devil Fruit Awakening being very similar to what I think Whitebeard's Devil Fruit Awakening may be. And speaking about Whitebeard, let's go to Marineford. You see, when Boa Hancock uses the powers of her Love Fruit, rules kind of go like this. If a person finds Boa Hancock attractive, they are susceptible to being turned to stone via her Love beam or Marrow beam, which is a heart-shaped beam that she uses by folding her hands in a way that they look like a heart. A flash of pink hearts in the forms of light come out of her hands and the target is turned to stone. And she has a bunch of other techniques that kind of do the same thing. The odd one out is Pistol Kiss, which is a weird projection that she can do by kissing her index finger, pointing it at a target like a gun and firing. And it's said that in order to do damage, she imbues this sort of kiss projection with armament Haki, because she does this on Luffy when he arrives at Amazon Lily, and it seems to have a physical effect, which is kind of weird, but that's beside the point. Usually how one evades Boa Hancock's petrification is if they are blind or they overcome their feelings of lust for her or admiration or whatever property that is proccing susceptibility to the Love Fruit is with pain. And we see this when she first appears on a marine ship and Vice Admiral Momonga stabs his hand in order to evade being petrified by the effects of the Love Fruit. So with that being said, here's the interesting thing. Going back to Marineford, we see Boa Hancock kind of break these rules because in chapter 560, in chapter 555, and in chapter 569, we have instances in which Boa Hancock actually turns an object into stone. This is completely abnormal for her because so far the Devil Fruit rules have only stated that she can only affect living beings with her fruit because only living beings feel lust. This is where I think the awakening starts to come in. The method is an attack called Perfume Fruitu. Excuse my pronunciation, but it literally translates to aromatic leg, right? What happens when she does this is that she actually petrifies Smoker's Juti, which a common misconception about Smoker's Jute is that it's completely sea stone, but that's not true. It's mostly steel and just the tip is made out of sea stone. That's why he always stabs Luffy with the tip, because that's the effective part of the weapon. So she breaks his Jutei in two by petrifying it with the same attack. Then she attacks a Pacifista, cracking its head by turning it into stone. And mind you, Pacifistas are just automatons. They are just robots. We don't know if they're cyborgs, but they are non-thinking, non-feeling automatons. They can't feel us. So her being even able to petrify one of them is interesting. And then the last example is that she randomly petrifies a pirate that's on the side of Whitebeard. But in petrifying him, she also petrifies the blade that he is holding and breaks through it along with part of his head. So with all of that being said, this is very interesting. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because this would be an awakening quite similar to Kid's awakening, in which he can make things that aren't magnetic. And he does this in Wano against Big Mom. So it's applying by the same rules, more or less. Now, a counter argument one might bring up is that didn't S-Snake do the same thing? If you don't know, S-Snake is a clone of Boa Hancock with the same abilities, thanks to her providing her lineage factor. We know that each of the original 7 warlords that we see at the start of the story have been cloned and made into a Pacifista class called a Seraphim. And these Seraphims, like I mentioned, are clones of the original 7 warlords mixed with Lunarian DNA. And they have the ability to shoot Pacifista lasers out of their hands. Don't know if they have the pyrokinesis that King had way back in the King versus Zoro fight, but yeah, that remains to be seen. We know they have the defensive capabilities when their fire is on, and they have the black wings, the dark skin, the white hair, etc., etc. So S-Snake has the ability of the Mero Mero fruit. Now you might be thinking, well, didn't S-Snake perform a very similar technique, the aromatic leg, the perfume furu? Yes, she did. However, the interesting part and the difference between her performing it and the original Boa Hancock performing it is that Boa Hancock doesn't need someone in being attracted to her in order to do it. She just does it, and whatever she makes contact with is petrified. With S-Snake, here's the difference. Number one, she didn't petrify an object. And number two, she was put in a situation in which Franky felt guilty for hurting her. Because the very interesting thing about the Love fruit in general that we find out through S-Snake is that the Love fruit's effects aren't solely connected to lust. They are connected to any sort of positive emotion that is tied to the physical being of the user. So in this situation, S-Snake uses her cuteness to her advantage. And in that cuteness, people are enamored by how cute she is or feel bad for her when they are in a position of power to hurt her. The latter is what she used as a weapon against Franky, because she was in pain after being crushed by this sea stone bubble, which then made Franky hesitate as she's like actually drumming up fake tears to make him feel guilty. Franky hesitates. She performs Perfume Furu, and that had the petrification effect on him. You see, the effect of the fruit was procced beforehand before she used the attack. Boa Hancock does not need to do this. She has done it on automatons who have no feelings toward her. She has done it on weapons, and she has done it in the process of petrifying someone who is holding a weapon. And those effects extended to the weapon. So with that being said, I'm going to say that her use of the technique is enhanced by the awakening, because now we have an example of the technique needing the extra step in order to work by a user who presumably isn't as adept at using the Devil Fruit as Boa Hancock is. Another just interesting thing is that we don't know if S-Snake can actually undo the petrification that, say, Boa would set up, because technically we find out a little more about how the Love Fruit works during Blackbeard's raid of Amazon Lily, which is also the first appearance of S-Snake. We find out that the Love Fruit is very much user tagged, in which only the user who has petrified someone can awaken them from that petrification. However, seeing as how S-Snake is a clone of Boa right down to the T, because we also find out, which was correctly predicted by me, that she also has admiration for Luffy because Luffy is unfazed by lust or cuteness. He's a very straightforward type of person. So seeing as how those feelings are transferred into S-Snake, one can only assume that the only person in the world that presumably can undo either S-Snake or Boa Hancock's petrification is one another. They can undo each other's petrification. And another interesting thought experiment would be, could one petrify the other because they're both of the same quality of beauty in their respective arenas? S-Snake is very cute, whereas Boa Hancock is very beautiful. So S-Snake could have admiration for Hancock as a older, mature woman, which I assume is the same admiration that the citizens of Amazon Lily have towards Boa Hancock. Or Boa Hancock could see S-Snake as a cute little girl and reminds her of herself, which could then make Hancock susceptible to her own love beam in a sense. So with that, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts though.
Polypede works here. In chapter 863, we are introduced to the concept of a special paramecia, which is a subtype of the paramecia class. Brought to you by Jinbei as he explained the powers of one Charlotte Katakuri. However, what if I told you that we have been seeing special paramecias since Little Garden? Let's continue. So over the years, I've heard people say that special paramecias are just Logias, but instead of being based in an element that occurs in nature, they just are whatever or can become whatever. I don't think that is the case, and I think the manga shows us that's not the case. So, to explain the methodology that I'm going with here, I have fit all the characters on this list into 3 tenets. And they are as follow. Tenet 1, a character must be able to generate a real substance both effortlessly and limitlessly. Therefore, characters who have their abilities connected to stamina or a particular rule set are out. That means characters like Otama or Law are out because Otama's substance is connected to her stamina, and with Law, he generates a field of influence. He does not generate a substance. Characters like Moria are out. He takes shadows and turns them into matter. He himself does not create shadows. Characters like Perona are out because she generates ghosts. Ghosts are not tangible, nor do they have any sort of standing in being a substance. She is out. Characters like Kid are out because he generates a force. Characters who turn things into other things, such as Diamante, are out because he is not creating anything. He is simply affecting other things. Characters like Mr. Five are out because what he does is that he has explosive properties to the normal body functions that his body normally creates. Things such as hair and mucus and such, all under the properties of the bomb fruit, have explosive abilities, but he is not generating explosives. It's just things that his body normally produces are explosive because of his fruit. With that being said, let's move on. Tenet 2. The generated substance of the user must have some sort of special property associated with it. This is different than your Logia users, because with Logia users, the user themselves usually have a special ability, but whatever they generate is played straight. Crocodile Sand does not dehydrate. He dehydrates. The only time you've ever seen Crocodile Sand dehydrate something, so to speak, is when it's in close proximity with his body. Like when he makes the Desert Blade from his body to attack those guards and impel down. Same thing with characters like Enel. Enel's lightning has no special properties. It is treated like normal lightning. Enel himself has special abilities, like he's able to restart his heart, but the lightning itself does not have special properties. Karibo, his body is infinite. His mud that he makes is not infinite, meaning that if he generated a puddle of mud, it would simply be mud. but he himself, as the user of the fruit, has an infinite body to store an infinite amount of stuff. Even with Blackbeard, as he describes his darkness works like a black hole. It sucks in and crushes things. So in that way, his darkness that he generates is placed straight. However, his body is unique and has unique properties, such as taking more pain than a normal individual. That's a special property. Or him, upon touch, turning off devil fruit powers. That is a special ability of his, not his darkness. With that being said, let's move on to the third and final tenet. Tenet 3. The user themselves must have some sort of special or localized relationship with the substance that they generate. We're going to get into this a lot, and this is going to be kind of the starting thing I'm going to talk about here. So, in beginning our list, let's address the elephant in the room, Charlotte Katakuri, the poster boy for this entire subtype. Charlotte Katakuri, the user of the Mochi Mochi fruit, is the first known special paramecia in the series. He has the ability to generate mochi effortlessly and seemingly limitlessly. The special properties of the mochi that he generates is that the mochi is unusually sticky and it's highly susceptible to liquid, displayed by Jinbei. What is also interesting about the Mochi Mochi fruit, in accordance to its user, Katakuri, is that Katakuri has this armor around his body all the time. This armor is made to look like his natural body. However, based on how seamlessly he can use his abilities in accordance with observation haki, it appears as though his body is made of mochi. However, this mochi has the special property in accordance with him to act as armor, but within said armor, it seems as though there is a limitless amount of space. Why do I say this? Well, in housing Katakuri's real body, the mochi is also able to house his spear, Mogura, because he pulls it out of himself during the fight between himself and Monkey D. Luffy. So, to add things up, I would say that 1, he can effortlessly and limitlessly generate mochi. 2, the mochi is both very sticky and highly susceptible to liquids. And 3, the special ability that the mochi has in accordance to him is that it allows him to wear the mochi as if it were armor, and it can house both his real body and other things such as his spear. I will say another ability that Katakuri might have, just because there's some story behind it, is that the Mochi Mochi fruit does give him some kind of localized elasticity, which is why his mouth is able to expand to ginormous sizes, whereas in the past, before he ate the fruit, his jaw ripped because he opened his mouth too wide and stuffed too many donuts within his mouth, which is why he has the scars on each side of his mouth. With that being said, let's continue. Katakuri isn't alone in generating an armor that looks like his body, because we have Treble, the user of the Beta Beta Nomi, or the Sticky fruit, which allows him to generate a very flammable and very sticky mucus effortlessly and limitlessly. His special ability in accordance with this fruit is that his nose seems to be perpetually running. Another special ability, like I mentioned previously, is that he can generate a suit of armor that, much like Katakuri, looks like his natural body. And with that being said, it's very interesting that, like Katakuri, he has a very high perception in which he can move out of the way when a oncoming attack is coming his way, at least most of the time, because there is a point in Dressrosa where he's actually bisected both in the manga and the anime by Usopp. However, seeing as how his real body was in one of the sections of his mucus armor, he was not affected by being bisected. Treble's boss, Don Quixote do Flamingo, is the user of the Ito Ito no Mi, otherwise known as the string fruit. Said fruit allows Do Flamingo to produce string effortlessly and limitlessly. Some unique qualities of the fruit are that it seems to have a special relationship to whatever it attaches to. So if Doflamingo attaches his string to a person, he can control that person as if they were a puppet. If he attaches his string to clouds, it allows him to actually fly through the air, swing on the clouds for leverage. So, if there are no clouds in the sky, Doflamingo cannot traverse the skies. Another interesting property of Doflamingo's string is that it is very, very tough and very, very durable. As Doflamingo has used it to cut a meteor, it itself is even strong enough to resist Haki-imbued sword swings from several different people when Birdcage was activated. Another interesting property of the string is that it seems to lose all motion and direction when Doflamingo is knocked unconscious, which kind of makes sense. If the puppeteer is no longer pulling the strings have no purpose. Another interesting thing that Doflamingo has, which doesn't really appear with any other character on this list, is that he could actually produce string within his own body. This was used to heal himself, to give himself stitches after experiencing the terrible internal damage of Law's Gamma Knife. Another interesting thing that Doflamingo does, which I think this is more so due to his personality as opposed to anything else, is that like Treble and like Katakuri, Doflamingo does in a way produce a suit of armor that is literally called Black Knight. You see, knight, armor, get it? However, due to his abilities and his sort of vain and narcissistic personality, he produces a suit of armor that looks like him, is an exact replica of himself, but he uses this replica, this suit of armor, as a puppet to fight for him as opposed to using it to protect him, which is why too he gets Gamma Knife by Law, because he wasn't using the armor like Treble and Katakuri to protect himself, because he sees himself as untouchable in a lot of circumstances, especially against rookie pirates. Another interesting thing that has been pointed out in the anime is that these Delfruit users of the special Paramecia class, when using their awakened abilities, they have the ability to transmute their surroundings into what they normally generate. And as such, they're able to use these newfound constructs of their generated substance in a sort of telekinetic way. This is more so shown more obviously with Katakuri when he has these like weird bubbles around his hands, though Doflamingo does it as well. You don't see the weird bubbles around his hands, but he does direct and control the spires of string with his mind, presumably. On the topic of puppeteering and possible Delfruit awakenings, let's talk about the former Warden of Impel Down, Magellan, who is the user of the Doku Doku no Mi, or the Venom fruit. However, in having the Venom fruit, that name is a bit deceiving because the ability allows him to limitlessly and effortlessly produce a wide range of poisons and gases. In producing poisons and gases, they usually come in the form of a purple liquid or a purple gas with a wide range of effects. For example, he has produced tear gas before. He has produced paralyzing agents before in the form of his Hydras. He can produce corrosive liquids. And before anyone asks, no, he cannot make his hands into stingers. He is taking the horns off of his costume Yes, he is wearing a costume. He's not a demon. He's taking the horns off of his costume, putting those horns on his hands, and then running, I guess, a corrosive type of poison through those horns, which acts like a type of stinger, which kind of gives credence to the whole venom designation that he gets in English. But anyway, like everyone on this list, he can produce a armor of poison so that when he is touched by an opponent, they become poisoned. Another interesting ability that he has is that he is completely immune to poison. The only time he seems to be even somewhat susceptible to poison is when he is ingesting it. Even then, the poison does not kill him. The effect is reduced to kind of just having food poisoning or eating raw or bad food because it gives him diarrhea. With that being said, much like Katakuri, he has been confused with being a Logia, and like Katakuri, he can use his abilities for transport because when he makes a Hydra, a big snake-like construct out of his poison, he can then travel through that construct, which is a technique called Venom Road. And like Katakuri, when he activates something called the Venom Demon, he controls it much like Katakuri telepathically, as it mimics his movements. The thing he produces is a giant automaton of poison that follows his every move, much like how Katakuri commands the mochi when the bubbles are around his hands, which leads me to believe that the Venom Demon could be an awakened ability. One thing that the Venom Demon does that his other poisons do not is that the Venom Demon can actually corrode objects as if it is poisoning them, which was the counter to another character on this list. So with that being said, the reason too why I think he doesn't turn his surroundings into poison is because of the battlefield. The battlefield in which his abilities are shown off is Impel Down, and seeing as how he loves Impel Down and the ability Venom Demon can destroy Impel Down, it would not be in his best interest to destroy someplace he holds dear. With that being said, let's move on to the person that he fights. Mr. 3, otherwise known as Galdino, is the user of the Wax fruit, making him a candle man. The funny thing about his ability is that he's literally a candle man. When he uses his ability, a weird little light appears on the top of his head, a little flame, making him like a candle. I have always had the headcanon that it's like he's melting the wax as he generates it, which is kind of cool, but that's his special relationship with his ability. Now, with that being said, Galdino has the ability to generate wax effortlessly and seemingly limitlessly. With that being said, the special property of the wax is that it's as hard as steel. Another special property of the wax is that it has the ability to immobilize people, like permanently, by filling their bodies up with wax over a long period of exposure, which is really weird and kind of deadly, and no one talks about that. That's wild, bruh. That's wild. But what's also interesting about Galdino is that much like a lot of people on this list, he uses his power as a suit of armor, which is called Candle Champion. And he's also given this suit of armor to Luffy at a time to fight Magellan. Another very interesting thing, which is a sort of, I guess, relationship you could say that he has personally with his ability, is that he takes on the properties of a candle, as when we see him in Impel Down and he is in the Blazing Hell portion of Impel Down, he seems to be actually physically melting, and his constructs lose their integrity because the heat in the surrounding area is so high, which is something very unique of him. Though we have seen that certain constructs that people make don't perform well under particular conditions. And with that being said, let's move on to our next character. Now that we finished talking about Mr. Doru no Mi, let's talk about some other prison related things. Hina, who is the rear admiral in the Marines, has the power of the Ori no Mi, otherwise known as the cage fruit. And having said ability, she can limitlessly and effortlessly generate this very odd metal, which comes in the form of many a structure. In the series, we see her make like a fence-like structure that can actually ensnare anyone that it comes across or anyone who passes through it. The special relationship she has with this ability is that if she passes through someone, she can actually generate a cage or a binding around them. I was really on the fence about putting her on this list, but the more and more I thought about it, the more and more she does make sense. I do think we do need to see more of her, but as it stands at the moment, she does fit the 3 tenets that I set up at the start of the video. She does generate a real substance. Said substance does have a special ability, and she does have a special relationship with said ability because her body does bend and twist around her targets in order to then pass through them, locking them in a metal structure that she has made. With that being said, let's continue our government affiliated characters with Khalifa. Yes, Khalifa, the best female fed around. Former member of CP9, current member of CP0, she has the power of the Awa no Mi, otherwise known as the Bubble Fruit, that allows her to limitlessly and effortlessly generate weird soap bubbles. These soap bubbles do act like normal soap bubbles as they have the ability to actually clean things. However, when they are used on a person, they turn people into these rubbery, shiny, slippery dolls, which kind of robs the target of their autonomy a little bit because they can neither stand nor grasp things. And we see this in her fight with Nami. Another interesting thing that we see in her fight with Nami is that her sort of personal relationship that she has with this ability is that she can make a full cocoon out of these bubbles that take the form of a hard bar of soap. This is such an odd ability, and you can see this in chapter 408. But the reason why I point it out is because it's not named, nor is it mentioned on the wiki anywhere, or at least there's no picture of it on the wiki. So I'm marking this down as something very unique because in her fight with Nami, this is the only thing that Khalifa does specifically for herself as a defensive measure. It's not for attacking like everything else is, because she has another suit of armor, much like a lot of guys on this list. But the suit of armor, which is the stupidest one yet, in which she just covers herself in soap bubbles, arches her arms and acts like a sheep. This armor just translates into more attacks as she fires the bubbles created at her opponent. So it's an armor, but it's more like a setup phase for more attacks. Whereas the bar of soap, which is a hard construct, which is unlike anything else she does, that is purely a defensive maneuver for protecting herself. So yeah, I'm counting that as something special. Now, switching from lawmen back to pirates, we have Charlotte Gillette, the user of the Bata no Mi, otherwise known as the Butter Fruit. Now, we know that she is a member of the Charlotte family and a member of the Big Mom Pirates. And I have to say, in all honesty, she's the only one on this list with the least amount of data. However, I think that's just because we don't see a lot of her. She could appear in the future and we could get more, because I do believe Big Mom is most likely coming back in the story. But for the time being, her ability, the Butter Fruit, has the power that allows her to generate unlimited butter effortlessly. This butter has a unique property of acting as a weird immobilizing agent as she uses it as shackles against Nami when the Straw Hats invade Whole Cake Island. Keeping with our Big Mom theme, next we have Charlotte Opera, user of the Curry no Mi, otherwise known as the Cream fruit. And having said fruit, Opera can generate a limitless amount of cream effortlessly. Said cream has the property of having sugar within it. Said sugar can cause a target severe burns when they come in contact with the cream. Another odd ability that Opera has that he apparently is wearing his ability on himself at all times as if he is cloaking his body in cream, much like, say, Magellan or even his big brother Katakuri. Like there's a constant suit of cream that he is wearing. And this doesn't seem to give him any defensive capabilities, as, for example, Jinbei could just punch right through him. So, not sure about the advantage of being a cream man all the time, but that's him. His special relationship is that he's always covered in the cream that he generates, even when he's not fighting. And the cream itself has a unique property of having sugar that can burn opponents when they come in contact with the cream. With that, let's continue with the Big Mom pirates, shall we? Next, we have Charlotte Cracker, the user of the Bisu no Mi, otherwise known as the Bis fruit. It allows him to generate biscuits limitlessly and effortlessly. The special property of the biscuits is that they are very, very hard, akin to like hardtack. Much like his older brother Katakuri and his mochi's stickiness, liquid can actually compromise the hardness of Cracker's biscuits, making one of the main draws of the fruit completely inert, which is insane. And another very interesting ability that he does is that he usually turns them into biscuit soldiers, hiding in one of them usually, which is another trope that is very common amongst Dilfer users of this presumed class, because yet again we have someone wearing armor. Now, this isn't a special relationship that he has with the fruit specifically, but I do like that he adds jam to his biscuit soldiers to simulate the idea of blood when they are cut. That is just a cool note to bring up. I thought his hair sparklers had something to do with his abilities, akin to Mr. 3. They do not. It is just a pun. And the special ability that he has associated with those biscuits is that it appears as though he can make them harder, and he brings them into being via clapping. I'm not sure if that's his personal flair or is that a necessity that needs to happen, but it's something to note because he's the only character in the series who does that when he is generating his substance. With that being said, moving on. Next, we have Charlotte Perospero, user of the Pero no Mi, otherwise known as the Lick fruit, that allows him to effortlessly and limitlessly generate candy. Said candy has the ability of being very hard, like Cracker's biscuits, but it's also extremely susceptible to heat. Another very interesting ability that it shares in common with Mr. 3's wax is that when Perospero uses an ability called Candyman, in which he completely candy coats a target, said target will be completely immobilized and will perish after 3 minutes of being completely coated in candy. This is very similar to what Mr. 3 does with his wax fruit. Another interesting thing about Perospero is that I'm not sure if this is an effect of the fruit, but it's very likely that his long tongue is an effect of the fruit, seeing as how the fruit in English is called the lick fruit and pero is the sound of licking. Another interesting ability that the fruit has is that he was able to use his abilities to generate himself a prosthetic limb, which I haven't seen before, honestly. Don't know if I would classify that as armor. Moving on, though. Next, we have the only supernova on this list, Basil Hawkins, who has the power of the Wara Wara no Mi, otherwise known as the Straw Fruit. What it allows him to do is effortlessly and limitlessly generate straw. Said straw has a unique property, which I guess this is also his unique relationship with the fruit, but it allows him to store 10 straw dolls in his body. Said dolls can transfer pain that he experiences to another person. So that is both his unique relationship with the fruit and the fruit's unique ability, the straw's unique ability. Now, another thing that he does is something called the Demon Conjuring phase, in which he dons a suit of straw armor and turns into a giant scarecrow-like entity. This is not dissimilar to what we see in Opera or Katakuri or Trable, in which he's just wearing a suit of straw. Then, on top of that, we have another construct that he can make, which is called Strawman's Card, in which he summons a giant scarecrow to do the fighting for him. Now, this ability is not dissimilar to, say, Cracker's Biscuit Soldiers. It's just a giant construct made out of his substance that fights for him with the same sort of voracious battle prowess as his Demon Conjuring phase. So that's very unique of him. And with that, we move on to our final two. Next on our list, we have Raizo of the Nine Scabbards, who have the ability of the Maki Maki no Mi, otherwise known as the Scrolling Jutsu, or the Scroll Jutsu, or more simply, the Scroll Fruit. It allows him to generate seemingly limitlessly and effortlessly scrolls at his will. So, these scrolls have the ability to do things such as duplicate Raizo himself, as well as absorb and release things. He does this against Kaido, absorbing his Bolo breath only to unleash it back onto him. He's done it too with the waters of Zou in order to extinguish the castle at Onigashima. So not only can he store multiple things at one time, he can designate multiple scrolls to do different things. So it's really at his disposal as to what the scrolls do, seeing as how he can seemingly generate an unlimited amount of them. I didn't know if I wanted to put him on this list, but he does make sense, and he is in the confines of the tenets that I have set forth so far. I think the special ability that he has in accordance to this fruit is that he can duplicate himself with these lifelike drawings. That might be something kind of special and specific to him, a specific relationship that he has with the fruit. But otherwise, yeah, that's a scroll fruit. Last but not least, we have Kurozumi Kanjiro, the user of the Fuda no Mi, otherwise known as the brush fruit. It allows Kanjiro to generate ink from his body at will, effortlessly and limitlessly. Now, the main strength of the fruit is creating constructs, and this is the only fruit on the list that has to have the user have another skill set in order to use the fruit at its most efficiency, because the fruit is dependent on the user's drawing ability. The grand scheme about Kanjiro throughout the story is that he pretends to draw poorly, and the constructs that he makes reflect him drawing poorly, like the dragon that's a riff off of Momonosuke, or the funny sparrow that he makes, or the funny tiger that he makes, right? But the grand secret is that he can actually draw very well. And he's made things like cranes and snakes and such, as well as Odin himself. So the strength of the fruit is created with no limit in sight, the only limit really being your imagination. And these automatons come into flesh upon the user's command. Another very interesting ability is that the fruit doesn't always have to use automatons or drawings in order to be effective, as Kanjiro has used an ability in which he has summoned a cloud of ink that rained down ink arrows upon his opponent. Another interesting thing that only happens once, but I think it should be brought up, his final construct, the Kazenbo, which origins are muddy is a construct that has an elemental aspect to it, as it was an entity of fire that could literally burn things that it came in contact with. So that's interesting. We don't get to see how far this ability can go. And with that being said, that has been the special Paramecia video, in which I uncover every Paramecia that might be of the special subtype. I hope you enjoyed. So, this video has been a long time coming. I think I've started concerning the recording of this video getting 3 times over my time on YouTube. Perhaps she already has it if she's a stowaway, like I always say, on the Sunny currently, or perhaps she will get it if she is still on Wano and she's palling around with Yamato during her cover story, right? Here's the thing, and this is a very creepy thought that came to mind. What if the awakening of the brush fruit is that the user can draw themselves, right? Which we see that the fruit is capable of doing normally, because that happens in chapter 974 when Conjuros find out to be the traitor, right? So that happens. We know that's the power of the brush fruit, right? And of course, we know that drawings can be given special properties. We see that through all of his constructs, just about, especially with the Kazenbo, which has the property of generating fire. So that's a little different. But what if the user can draw themselves, and then in drawing themselves, they have imbued that copy with the powers of the brush fruit. So then that copy can draw a copy of itself, and so on and so forth. And then all of these copies have the same powers of the original. Now, if Carrot has this ability, it'll be a funny play on the whole stereotype of rabbits breeding quickly and overpopulating an area very fast. But that's a very scary thought, to just make someone who is actually you and has the same powers as you, and then they too can then make a copy of that, and a copy of that, and a copy of that. And we haven't really seen a Dofru go that far with its copying abilities. We've seen things such as the Biscuit Soldiers, or say Doflamingo's Black Knight, but neither of them could actually activate their powers beyond being what they were at the time. So Black Knight was a simple copy of Doflamingo. He unraveled Black Knight to create the birdcage, but the Black Knight was kind of stunted in what it could actually do. Same thing with Cracker's Biscuit Soldiers. They can't make more crackers. They are simply constructs made by Cracker. That's it. So what if in this situation with the user of the brush fruit, in this case Carrot, what if she could make perfect copies of herself that have her same abilities, and then they too can make copies, and so on and so forth, and then all of them can draw different things? That is terrifying. And then even beyond that, what happens if all of them draw a moon and give themselves Sulong? This can get out of hand very, very fast, but it's a fascinating thing to think about, because I think it's very possible. And if that special Paramecia video turns out to be true, it would kind of fall in line with what we've been seeing, because it's not so much turning your surroundings into ink, but it's a bit more sinister than that, because you are multiplying yourself to affect more surface area to draw on. So it's not transmogrification that we see with like Katakuri and Doflamingo, but it's just as bad. And awakenings in that situation, I never thought would be all the same, but would be in the same ballpark, which is just making more of the generated substance. So in making an ink clone of yourself that has the same brush powers as the user then can make more drawings and make more drawings and make more drawings, basically turning themselves into a full art studio. Then 2 could be a play on the whole bit of animation itself, which is just drawing the same picture over and over and over and over again, which is how you simulate life in 2D animation. You draw the same picture over and over and over again. So in this situation, it will be a play on a principle of animation, but also you would be drawing your own animators and making your own animation studio while being a principle of animation. So it's a double entendre in that way. But with that being said, give me your thoughts. Polyp works here. Happy birthday, Usopp, king of the snipers. So, over the years, we have seen Usopp use a hammer. Said hammer has been a lie most of the time. The only time where the weapon was actually real and effective in being a hammer was against Chu in Arlong Park. All other times, the hammer has been used to more so shock the opponent as opposed to doing any real damage. So, here's the thing that I think is going to occur in Elbaf, and I bring this up now because we are ever getting closer to Elbaf being a reality. So, in Elbaf, I think Usopp will actually get a real giant hammer, a hammer that weighs hundreds of tons. And that hammer would be a Dofus user having eaten a type of squirrel fruit. So, how will Usopp wield such a hammer? I think it's possible that, seeing as how we have seen characters like Spandam have a sword who has eaten an elephant fruit, and despite Spandam being so weak, he's able to wield Funk Free no matter what form he's in. I think the opposite could be true in this situation. Even though the weapon is a real giant's hammer weighing hundreds of tons, because it's eaten a squirrel fruit, Usopp is able to wield it because the animal itself is small and light. So to Usopp, the weapon would be light. However, to anyone else that he is hitting, the weapon would actually weigh hundreds of tons. So with that being said, I have a suggestion on what the squirrel is going to reference. In Norse mythology, there is a giant tree called Yggdrasil. We see that there is a giant tree of some sort in Elbaf, or at least that's what's being implied. We've seen it kind of off panel, I think, in a few shots. We've seen it at the start of Big Mama's flashback, rather. And we see that there is this giant tree, and based on the giants in One Piece being so rooted in Norse mythology, it is likely that the tree is Yggdrasil. So, 2 things, or rather 3 things, could be going on. 1, there is a giant bird at the top of the tree, an eagle of some sort, or perhaps a rock. Not sure. And then there is some sort of serpentine dragon at the bottom of the tree. In Norse mythology, this is called the Nihog. And then the bird at the top of the tree is referenced as the eagle. So there is a third party in this duo of animals called Ratatoskr. Ratatoskr is a kind of squirrel. This squirrel runs up and down the tree as he's spreading gossip between the eagle and the Nihog, so they would hate each other, right? This is very similar to Usopp's character because, as you know, Usopp is introduced into the story as a liar, and he uses lying as a hobby. They're ultimately white lies, but things get out of hand. Pirates come to his village. He tries to warn the people, but they don't believe him because he's always lying about pirates coming. So, Ratatoskr would also have a bad reputation as a liar in this context. Now, when it applies to One Piece, the squirrel in question who's playing the role of Ratatoskr could be one of 2 things. 1, it could just be a squirrel who is actually a hammer. So a hammer who has eaten some sort of squirrel fruit. My bet, if this is the case, is some sort of flying squirrel, because it would be cool for Usopp to have a weapon that could just fly to him whenever he wants. And it kind of plays into the role of being a projectile in some cases. Like perhaps he could shoot the squirrel as a projectile, and then the squirrel turns into a giant hammer once it met the target. That'd be a cool thing. But the idea of it being a flying squirrel is something I could see. Now, the alternative is that we go full mythical Zoan, and the hammer in question has eaten the squirrel fruit model Ratatoskr. And in that situation, you can make Ratatoskr whatever you want. I know in the depiction that we have of him, it appears as though the actual mythical creature has some sort of horn. In Norse mythology, his name could loosely translate to Tusk Traveler or the Climber Tusk. It would be really interesting if the squirrel itself knows a lot about plants initially because of the legend of Ratatoskr. In knowing about plants, he will be a great help to Usopp, because of course, Usopp's main focus in his artillery are the pop greens. So perhaps Ratatoskr could enhance any plant that Usopp makes and gives it more abilities, or perhaps just makes it bigger. And I think if he did have a horn, said horn would glow, and that's how he would potentially grow the plants, meaning growing Usopp's pop greens. And this is a very interesting ability because someone in the franchise has had this type of ability already. Not talking about Green Bull. I'm actually talking about the guy from FemZ named Benz. He had the Mosa Mosa no Mi, or the Grow fruit, in which he could enhance plants that already existed. So that's another just suggestion that Ratatoskr could have. Another interesting thing is that if he is a mythical Zoan and not just a plain red squirrel, this will be the first mythical Zoan who is actually an object. So meaning an object who has eaten a mythical Zoan fruit in the series proper. We've had things in video games before, but never in the actual series. This would also be a very interesting play because we have never actually heard the thoughts of a Zoan user who was originally a weapon. So perhaps in being a mythical creature, he can actually talk, which kind of makes him a more of a real character, but it would also sort of support the idea of him gossiping and spreading lies to the Ego, whomever that may be in One Piece, and then Nihog, whomever that may be in One Piece. I could also see the alternative in which it's just a normal squirrel, and the only one who can understand the gossip, presumably, is Chopper. That'll be good as well, making use of Chopper's very unique ability to talk to animals. Also, third option could be Ratatoskr, and Ratatoskr doesn't need to speak at all. Sky's the limit. Now, so in Marvel Comics, there is a Ratatoskr. The Ratatoskr in Marvel Comics is often associated with Squirrel Girl, and it itself is a shapeshifter. Sometimes it's a character known as Girl Squirrel. Sometimes it's just a full-on human woman by the name of Rachel Oscar. So, yeah, in Marvel Comics, Ratatoskr is a shapeshifter, like the idea I'm proposing here. So I just found that interesting. While on the topic of Marvel Comics, let's talk about what the hammer that the squirrel actually is would be. Both in popular culture and in Norse mythology, the hammer wielded by Thor is called Mjolnir. Now, will our hammer who has eaten the squirrel fruit have the same name? I think this is very likely because we have had complex names before that have related back to mythology and even the real world. For example, we have had a fireball named Prometheus. We have had a cloud named Zeus. We have had a sword named Napoleon. So that is very likely. A cool corruption of Mjolnir I could see happening maybe is Mole, which would be a cool reference back to Miss Merry Christmas, which was the first time in which the hammer lie started. Because, of course, back then, Usopp pretended as if he had a 5-ton hammer. So, with that being said, going forward, in Norse mythology, the hammer itself, as far as I know, could not generate lightning. So it's likely that it won't generate lightning in One Piece. I think that's really up for, say, NL and some of Luffy's attacks, who are called Thor and El Thor, respectively. Now, would there actually be a Thor in One Piece? I think it's very likely, seeing as how we have a Loki. It's very on brand for that Loki to have a brother, even if he's disgraced. It makes sense for him to have a brother named Thor. On the topic of Thor, the whole worthiness thing that you see in the comics, like only one who is worthy can wield Thor's hammer, that's not a thing in Norse mythology. That's completely made up. In Norse mythology, the hammer is known for slaying a lot of giants and giant associated creatures like ogres, which brings up some very interesting thoughts about how the hammer will be treated in One Piece, because I have always held the belief that giants and ancient giants have beef because ancient giants are so much bigger than normal giants. And on top of that, we have been alluded to that Onis / ogres are associated with ancient giants in some way. Our first taste of this, presumably, is in Thriller Bark, as Gecko Moria does look very similar to Kaido and Yamato, as he is a big humanoid with horns, and he is our gateway into being introduced to the ancient giant known as Oars. So it's very likely. Same thing goes for Buccaneers, as it's very likely that Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, was a Buccaneer, and in his ranks he had Oars Jr., who is an ancient giant. So I'm just saying that the whole half giant thing has been around. So it's very likely that if this hammer does belong to a giant, it was used to actually slay ancient giants. Because a funny thing about Oars and Oars Jr. is that they wear skulls on their person. Oars wears skulls on his belt. Oars Jr. wears skulls around his neck in the form of a necklace. Based on how big they are and how big the skulls are in proportion to their body, it's very likely that those are skulls of giants. So they have eaten or killed giants and are using their skulls as trophies. So it will make sense that the giants in kind fight back in some way. I can see that being a thing. Now, another interesting ability that the hammer known as Mjolnir has in Norse mythology is that it can shrink down. I'm of two minds about this. Either the hammer itself will have this ability, and then the squirrel will just inherit this ability from the hammer, or, like I've said previously, the squirrel being significantly smaller than the hammer itself could just be a reference to the hammer's size alteration in Norse mythology. So the giant hammer being able to shrink down to the size of a small squirrel could just be a reference to that. Another thing of note is that the hammer is said to be invincible. I know we have an invincible material in One Piece known as sea stone. I'm of the mind that sea stone objects cannot eat devil fruits. So the next best thing is any of the ores in One Piece. Could be drunken iron ore, could be a offshoot of Wapol metal. Don't know, but most likely it's a tough metal of some sort. Not going to really claim what the metal will be or what the metal will come from, but it will most likely be a really tough metal. So to that, I kind of shrug my shoulders at. Another thing of note that I think might be very important is that the hammer is able to return to its user. This is canonical in Norse mythology, and it's referenced a lot in the Marvel properties. However, when you're talking about One Piece, I think if the hammer is a user of either a regular squirrel fruit or a Ratatoskr fruit, it'll be cool if either squirrel was a flying squirrel so that the fruit could replicate that ability in returning to Usopp when the squirrel is a part from Usopp. Now, this is a little trivia bit that I just wanted to throw in here because I found it kind of interesting. So in chapter 1081, we have a color spread featuring all the boys of the Straw Hat crew taking a nap with a bunch of squirrels. This is a color spread, if you recall, that Sandy is reading a cooking book, but it's supposed to be a cooking book. But the point of interest is that I really do like, and I mentioned this when the chapter came out, that Usopp is sleeping peacefully with a squirrel, and the squirrel trusts him enough to protect the berry hoard that he has collected. In this situation, the berries could represent the pop greens. Just saying. And this is the only occurrence that we see in the color spread between Squirrel and Straw Hat member, in which the squirrel trusts says Straw Hat member with their food. So that could be a reference of things to come. Another bit of icing on the cake, and this is going to be a bit of a ramble, but there is a very interesting thing to note of how we can get a squirrel reference, or how squirrels could be relevant in the Elbaf arc, because we kind of have a bit of a long-winded connection. So in Thriller Bark, right? Thriller Bark is very good for Giants lore because we are introduced to Oars. Moria has a attack called Shadow's Asgard, which is another reference to Norse mythology. But we also have the Rolling Pirates, who are captained by Lola. We know that Lola was supposed to marry King Loki of Elbaf. Her crewmates, the Risky Brothers, we later find out, had their shadows taken in Thriller Bark and put into squirrel zombies. This is very interesting because now, coming back to Elbaf, it's very likely that they are going to be in Elbaf because Lola actually married Gati. Gati is sort of Capone Beji's right-hand man of the Fire Tank Pirates. So it's likely, seeing as how Lola married Gati in Beji's cover story, and now the Rolling Pirates are a part of the Fire Tank Pirates, it's very likely that we'll see the Fire Tank Pirates again, which kind of brings back the sort of squirrel idea because, of course, the Risky Brothers, in being a part of the Fire Tank Pirates, did have aspects of themselves, their shadows, put into squirrel zombies. And another reason that I should point out is that we meet the Fire Tank Pirates in Whole Cake Island, which kind of submits their involvement with Giants because, of course, Whole Cake Island is Big Mom's arc. Big Mom is grossly involved with Giants, and Chiffon and Lola are her daughters. So whenever Chiffon and Lola pop up, Big Mom can't be too far behind. And whenever Giants are around, Big Mom can't be too far behind either, because she's one of the few characters in the series who is very intimately involved with Giants and their culture, as she was raised on Elbaf for a time. So yeah, however, I'm on the fence on whether the squirrel who is the hammer, whether it will be able to talk or not, because the squirrels that the Risk Brothers were, the squirrel zombies, they could talk. So it's kind of up in the air as to where that would go, but I can see it either way. So to wrap things up, I think Usopp is going to get a real Giant's hammer. Said Giant's hammer is going to be the user of some sort of squirrel fruit, either a normal squirrel or a mythical Zoan in the form of Ratatoskr. I think because of the weird sort of logic that applies to objects who has eaten Zoan fruits, Usopp will be able to wield said hammer because to him, the hammer will be as light as the squirrel. However, to others, it will be as heavy as the normal weight of the hammer, presumably hundreds of thousands of tons. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching and give me your thoughts. Polyp works here. So in light of recent events, things that have happened in 1108 and in 1109 of One Piece, I've noticed something. So I've talked about how Saturn has two different variants of his awakening, right? There is the traditional awakening where you're, I guess, in a weird version of the hybrid state. And then there is the other awakening in which you are in the awakened state that we see with the demon guards, in which is a more monstrous version of the hybrid state, right? Okay. The demon guards all have a particular look, except one. And we're going to talk about that. So with Minotauros, he has beady eyes. Minowala also has beady eyes. Rhinoceros has beady eyes. And then Chihuahua also has beady eyes. This is probably a art indication to show that the lights are on, but nobody's home. The animal present within their devil fruits is driving their body, holding their human consciousness captive, right? The same thing could be said about Monster Chomper in the pre-time skip during Enies Lobby, in which his eyes are beady, but they're glowing, making him more menacing looking. But again, the lights are on, but nobody's home. In his case, perhaps it's more akin to like the human consciousness given to him by the fruit is turned off, and now his bestial desires are mixing in with human violence, and then that's all that he is, just violence. However, if you were paying attention, I didn't mention one demon guard or jailer beast in particular because he is depicted in a different way. Who that is Minnow Zebra. Minnow Zebra has normal eyes. They are not beady. He looks sad, but they are not beady. He has just regular eyes. What I think is going on with him, which could be a variation of this case, is that the animal within the, I guess, horse fruit model zebra or whatever it's called is driving his body, but he is taking a back seat, meaning he's watching himself do all these actions, but he can do nothing about it because from just in how he is depicted makes me think that, because every other demon guard is portrayed in the exact same way but him. And what Oda is very good at is letting the art speak for itself and letting the art dictate where he's trying to go with the story. So that's what I think. I think Minnow Zebra is in a very unique situation. He could be like the strongest mentally, but yet and still the animal, the presence within the devil fruit is driving his body. But unlike the others, he isn't completely unaware. He's aware, but he can do nothing about it. And with that being said, give me your thoughts. Polypede Works here, coming at you once again with another devil fruit theory. Today, we'll be discussing how Chomper of the Straw Hat Pirates is the actual true user of the human fruit model Sasquatch, which is an ancient Zoan. Let's get into it. However, I just lied. I have lied to you. If I have done my job correctly, this catchy intro, along with that thumbnail and that title, should have you watching this video, okay? In saying that, over the years, there have been many a theory about Chomper being something other than a reindeer who has eaten a human fruit. However, even after the bait and switch with Luffy being the actual user of the human fruit mythical model sun deity Nika, that doesn't apply to every character in the series. I'm sorry to tell you. Chomper is just a reindeer, a weird reindeer because he has a blue nose. So he is a mutant, but a reindeer that has eaten the human fruit. That's what he is. He is just an animal who has eaten a Zoan fruit. Now, the sticking point that a lot of people just can't get over is that Chomper should look like a normal guy when he's in his full human state, which is heavy point. However, if you've been paying attention
to just various fruit users over the course of the series. If they aren't a normal human, something is going to be up. Take Kaido, for instance. Kaido is human-like, but he is an Oni. He has horns. When he enters his hybrid state and his full dragon state, he has 2 sets of horns. One that he has normally, and the other from being a dragon. We know that there is a difference here because when Momonosuke, his fruit doppelganger, when he also becomes the same type of dragon, he only has 1 set of horns. They are using the same fruit. However, based on Kaido looking how he looks and being a non-human, there are certain attributes of himself that just aren't going to be overwritten by the dragon form. And in some aspects, some of the attributes of his person kind of mesh with his dragon form. This is noted when he turns into a hybrid and a full dragon. He keeps his mustache and beard. Whereas with Momonosuke, seeing as how both as a child and as an adult, he doesn't have a mustache and beard, his mustache and beard remain pink as an aspect of the dragon. There is this funny thing about Zoan fruits. If you aren't a base human, you're going to look weird. That's just the nature of things. Sometimes the fruit is good enough to push out any attributes that would keep it from transforming the being into the designated form. But sometimes if those weird attributes don't affect the integrity of one being becoming a form designated by the fruit, then they just stay. They just stay. So in Chomper's instance, when he becomes his full human form, which is his heavy point, his horns and hooves go away, but he remains like weirdly furry and he keeps his blue nose because humans have hair and humans have noses. So those 2 things can stay. They're weird, but they can stay. However, humans don't have hooves. Humans don't have antlers. So those gotta go. What's very funny is that now in the post-time skip, heavy point is the only point without the hooves or the antlers. I just find that funny, but that's beside the point. The point is that the Devil Fruit determines which traits stay and which traits go, depending on the individual and the integrity of the form that the Devil Fruit is trying to get that individual to reach. Now, when an individual becomes good enough, this becomes a non-factor as they can control their transformations at will. Like Chomper in the post-time skip, he doesn't need his Rumble Ball to access multiple transformations. He just does that normally because his mind has caught up with his body. That being said, with characters like Kaido or Ulti or Page One or Who's Who or Black Maria, with these characters, they are human enough to where the transformation goes off without a hitch, but certain little aspects are either incorporated within the form itself or are completely ignored and just show up anyway. I will say things can be a little fickle in how the fruit tends to pick and choose attributes that it wishes to keep. However, there's enough consistency in which you can say that these are actual conscious decisions on the part of Oda. A lot of it could just be whatever looks cool is what we're going to put on the paper. But at the same time, yeah, if things are done consistently enough to where you're like, okay, this has to be some sort of rule going on here. So in the case of non-humans, like say Peckhams, even when he's a full turtle, he keeps his lion tail because he's a lion mink. That's strange. Or like in the case of Baron Tamago, his partner, even when he's broken as an Eggman, because he's the user of the egg fruit, and he hatches into a chick and then a rooster, he keeps his long legs because he is a member of the long leg tribe. And then if you want to talk about animals, there's actually one animal in particular that is in a very similar situation to Chomper, that being Onimaru, the fox from Wano. He has eaten the mythical variant of the human fruit called the human fruit model Onyudo. And Onyudo is like a weird yokai that looks like a monk, but I guess how it's presented in the story is just, again, based on Oda's interpretation of the yokai. So I guess whatever on that front. But the Onyudo that Onimaru becomes still retains Onimaru's unique markings, which are his red eyebrows. Even as a weird ogre monk thing, he keeps this aspect of his fox form. But no other aspect of his fox form shows up in the Onyudo form because that would compromise the Onyudo form. Because it wouldn't be Onyudo anymore. It'd be like a weird Onyudo / fox. Then, with another animal in Pierre, if you don't know, Pierre is the bird that belongs to Ganfall of Skypiea, you know, the old night guy. That bird has eaten the horse fruit. And eating the horse fruit, it can become a Pegasus. But either as a bird or as a horse, the patterns of its body do not change. It's still brown and pink with the same patterns, with the same makeup of colors. This is because his doe fruit doesn't really check for color because it's a horse. There's no point here. Now, if he ate the Azure Dragon fruit, we would have something to talk about because, well, Azure Dragon, it's in the name. It turns you into an Azure Dragon. However, in being a horse could be any color. So that's not a detriment to this bird becoming a horse. His weird patterns are a detriment to the integrity of him transforming into a horse or into a Pegasus in this situation because he's a hybrid. But still, if he were to transform into a full horse, I still think he would be a pink and brown horse with the same patterns that he has as a bird. So, wrapping things up, what have we learned today? We have learned that Chomper, despite years and years and years and years and years of theories, is not a Sasquatch. He is not a Yeti. He is not a gorilla. He is not a caveman or a Wendigo or a Tanuki or anything else. Perhaps in a metatextual context, he can seem like those things because he transforms or whatnot. You're free to make jokes about it, as people in the series do. However, there is no hidden agenda with Chomper. Just because Luffy had one, Luffy having one kind of unfolds into way more story aspects and avenues. Chomper's does not. I know I have said in the past that there are no jokes, there are just funny explanations. However, Chomper being called a Tanuki is just a joke. It's a joke because he is a little furry creature that has the power of transformation, and he has multiple transformations. That's the joke. It's no sort of hidden agenda with him being called a Tanuki. He is not a caveman because he is furry when he becomes Heavy Point. That's not the case. He is furry with a blue nose because his reindeer form is furry with a blue nose. The reason why he looks like that is because the human fruit deemed that the fittest form to give him, in which it doesn't disrupt the integrity of him looking like a human. It still kind of does, but that's the closest approximation that the fruit could handle. And as we know now, if you are a non-human eating a Zoan fruit, you're most likely going to look weird. The fruit will do its best to retain the integrity of its function in turning a user into a designated animal or form or whatever. But the point of the matter is that if you're a non-human, certain things aren't going to get picked up by the doe fruit, and the result will be kind of freakish. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts. When our funny little rubber lad turned into a magical albino, everyone lost their minds. People were saying, where do we go from here? How could this be? Then we find out that he is not a paramecia user, and that was all a government cover-up. No, he is a mythical Zoan user. And then the question becomes, well, why didn't Luffy ever have any forms like the rest of the Zoans? I have made videos on this topic before, but I think now, since there are a few more eyes on my channel, I should explain this again. It's actually very simple, and I plan to break it down for you today as to why Luffy does not have any forms as a Zoan. As Vegapunk tells us, Devil Fruits are born out of the wishes and desires of people. They are the wishes and desires of people made manifest. Therefore, you can say Zoan fruits are all based on the human perception and desire to be the various creatures and myths that exist in the world. Stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, or the various beasts, both present and past, that have inhabited the various areas that humans inhabit. With that being said, it makes a lot of sense that the Zoan fruit type is approached in a very scientific way, because unlike Paramecia and Logia, Zoan are broken down both by fruit type and by model. So when you see a Zoan, most of the time, it would be animal, model this particular animal. So in, say, Pale's case, he has the bird fruit, model falcon. And then you have Marco, who has the bird fruit, model phoenix. The important thing to remember here is that the model type is not what is important here. It is the fruit classification, the thing that comes first in the naming, the actual animal. Keeping the fruit name in mind, I want to bring you back to chapter 149, entitled Rumble. This is during Drum, in which Chomper is talking about the mechanics of his Rumble Ball. He says that each one of his base forms as a Zoan emits a wavelength that can be altered by the intake of a Rumble Ball, thus giving him 4 additional forms. Therefore, this says that each Zoan, as we traditionally know them, has a wavelength assigned to each one of their forms. I like to think of it as a sliding scale of sorts. So at one end, you have their default form. In the middle, there's a hybrid state. And at the far end, it's the animal form or whatever form that is contained within inside the Devil Fruit. And then in between all 3 of those forms are several ticks that determine several sort of partial transformations that we see with Chomper's Rumble Ball state. So with that being said, what happens when the organism who eats the fruit is the same type of organism as the essence within the fruit? You get Luffy. You get Luffy because Luffy is a human who has eaten a human fruit. Therefore, seeing as how the organism within the fruit is a human and the organism consuming the fruit is a human, there's nothing for the user to transform into, because the two are the same type of organism, both the one eating it and the one inside the fruit. So what happens then? What happens, I think, and we've seen 3 examples of this, is that the fruit accounts for whatever the user doesn't have that the essence within the fruit actually does have. So in Luffy's situation, Luffy is a human, so there are no transformations. But Luffy is initially not made of rubber. However, Nika literally is a rubber man. So, seeing as how Luffy is a man that is not made of rubber, the fruit makes him a man made of rubber. You already checked off the human requirement, so we have nowhere to go there, but the fruit can make you rubber. So that's what it does to Luffy. This process repeats with characters like Stronger. Stronger from the Blackbeard Pirates is a horse that ate the horse fruit model Pegasus. But seeing as how the Pegasus fruit is a horse fruit and Stronger is a horse, well, you can't make a horse more of a horse. So what does it do? It gives Stronger wings, because Stronger was a normal horse without wings. So it filled in any gap that was left, which is giving him wings like the Pegasus. The third and final person on this list is former Fleet Admiral Sengoku, who is a human that ate the human fruit model Daibutsu, or Great Buddha. I don't think he got much from his fruit initially, because he's a human that ate a human fruit. So transformations are off the table. However, I do think it gave him some sort of form of increased intellect or increased insight. And then over the years, he just trained that, which is why he is heralded as a great tactician. But if you do recall, he did have a transformation in Marineford. However, I think that is his only transformation, and it's a transformation based on awakening. So you could be saying, well, Sengoku doesn't have any clouds around him. How can he be awakened? Well, from the story so far, we know that there are two types of awakening. The first being the big hulking version that we see in the Demon Guards. I think Sengoku is the natural occurrence of that could have happened because he was so adept with his fruit, but doesn't get something about it. Meaning he doesn't get what his fruit is about, but his mind and body are so caught up with his abilities that he's there, but he's not quite there. Because from how the story is going, the eloquent awakening, the one with clouds, is being propped up as the perfect awakening. So what Sengoku has is the more controlled version of what the Demon Guards have. Now, the difference between Sengoku and Luffy versus characters like Lucy and the Demon Guards is this. With Lucy and the Demon Guards, you have a transformation that is basically just a variation on a hybrid state. There's nothing really fancy about it. It's a compromise between the base form of the user and the animal form that is contained within the respective fruits. The only difference is that characters like Lucy got to retain their human sensibilities, whereas the Demon Guards more so have beast-like sensibilities, for whatever reason that is. However, with Sengoku and Luffy, when they awaken, they were already humans. They were humans that ate human fruits. So, there's no need for compromise, because they were already the same type of beings that were being held within the fruit. So when they awaken, they just inherit the physical traits of the beings held within the fruits, along with any other additional powers that those beings may have. So to recap, the reason why Luffy, as a Zoan Fruit user, does not have any transformations is because he is of the very rare group of Zoan Fruit users who have eaten a fruit that contains the same type of organism that they were already. So he is a human that ate a human fruit, much like how Sengoku is a human that ate a human fruit, or like how Stronger is a horse that ate a horse fruit. And the only time these type of users get a transformation is when they awaken, in which the true nature of the fruit truly comes to the forefront, and the user inherits all of the aspects of the being that is within the fruit. So for Luffy, it's becoming a magical albino. For Sengoku, it's becoming a giant golden Buddha. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Give me your thoughts. I think I may have an idea as to what the Paw Paw Fruit's awakening ability would be. Okay, so if you remember back in Fishman Island, right, when the crew get kind of separate in the water and Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy ended up sharing the same bubble, I think we're going to get something that basically alludes to that. However, what I think is going to happen is that Kuma will send out a special paw pad bubble, right? Based on what we see in Thriller Bark and the whole Straw Hat separation, it's very obvious that Kuma can target what he wants to push out and where he wants to push people to. That's why he has a reticle on his jumpsuit. He's targeting where he wants things to go, and he's targeting what he wants to push out. This also goes with his whole thing of asking people where they like to go, because he can literally send them there. That's the whole point. So what I think what his awakening ability would be is that he'll send out this paw bubble. This paw bubble will pick up all the people and things that he has in mind at the time, right? So even though he's without a will right now, he still, I guess you could say, has a robotic memory with all the bounty posters listed, and he knows what the Sunny is. So that's what I'm thinking. I think he's going to collect all the Straw Hats, possibly Vegapunk as well, collect the Sunny, and then when all these things are collected, he'll simply ask, or the bubble will ask, I should say, where would you like to go? Then this giant paw bubble containing all these people and the Sunny will then fly off to wherever the recipient wants to go. And I'm calling this the shuttle paw. So it's a big bus in the shape of a paw, basically. And once that request is made, the paw will speed off and take the Straw Hats.
I've been thinking about this for a while,
and the Sunny
what
where
if
they would like
and
to go.
Zoan
With that being said,
Awakening
give me your
are
thoughts.
more or less the same. The reason why I'm coming to this conclusion is because, unlike Paramecia, what Logias and Zoan seem to do is kind of hijack the entirety of the person who has consumed the fruit. For example, with our main character, Luffy. Luffy from the beginning says he is a rubber man because he literally has the powers of a rubber man, meaning his entire constitution of his body has been compromised by his fruit. And he has a power that's always on all the time. Though I think that may be due to him being a human, eating a human fruit. But still, you even see this with Chopper. Chopper, regardless of the point that he's in, retains his human intelligence. It has changed him completely. He is no longer the being he was before. He's a totally different new thing. This does happen with Paramecia, though it's really rare and very situational. Like, say, Buggy technically is changed forever because of his fruit. Brook is basically very situational because of the circumstances that befell him in the process of his fruit activating. So it's not a all the time thing, but with Logia and Zoan it is, especially when you consider too, Zoans are the only one that can actually make nothing into something. What I mean by this is that you have like a gun, right? A gun eats a dog fruit and becomes a living creature. It becomes a new entity. So that's the power of a Zoan fruit. It completely changes the constitution of whoever eats it. The same can be said with Logia fruits, because just this past chapter, in chapter 1091, Kizaru is referred to as a man made of light. His constitution has changed completely. He is light. You don't really have that sort of definite statement when it comes to Paramecia users. You don't really
see that all the time. I think the only time that I can recall in reference to Capone Beige being a castle, but even still, then there's like some extra steps with that. Like he is, but he isn't. You kind of see what I mean? Like he is the castle, yeah, he could enter himself. So who is really the real Beige in that situation? It's a whole thing. But with Logia and Paramecia, it's very cut and dry and to the point. Kizaru is light. Ace is fire. That's even said by Oris Jr. at one point. Ace is fire. They can shift between being corporeal and incorporeal. So it's like they're like this, not all the time, but it's suggested that it's possible that this has compromised who they are, and they have the option to be like this if they want to, which is another thing that Paramecia don't really have the luxury of, because some of them have to have activation principles attached. Some of them can only affect certain things. Some Paramecias, like, say, Diamante, can only affect objects, and then somebody like, say, Sugar can only affect living beings. So it's very wishy-washy and very specific when you're talking about Paramecias. With Zoans and Logia, it's very broad. You literally are what you eat in both of those cases. You are lightning, you are fire, you are darkness. And then with Zoans, you literally are the animal. Even with mythical Zoans, you are the ideals that constitute this myth. You are the hopes and desires that brought this myth into reality. That's what you are. That's why mythical Zoans are so powerful. So when you consider awakening, now let's talk about how a Logia fruit user becomes awakened. So 2 points. Number 1, said by Vegapunk, devil fruits as a whole are the manifestations of the thoughts and dreams of people. The idea of, would it be cool if I could do this, or would it be cool if I could do that? Secondly, brought up by Kaido when it comes to awakening, awakening happens when the user's body and mind have caught up with their abilities. Now, taking that information, we can come to some conclusions based on what we've seen from Zoans specifically. With mythical Zoans, like Luffy, when you become awakened, your life path and your body have both coincided with the legend that brought the fruit into manifestation in the first place. The sun deity Nika is the warrior of liberation. He brings smiles to people's faces and takes them out of bondage. That's what Luffy has been doing since the start of the story. He just hadn't had the training or experiences to push him to the point of being awakened. So his mind was in the right place, but his body was not strong enough. This happened during the Kaido fight, and therefore he awakened. I think with Logia, we have a similar principle going on, because with Logias, it's not really the element that's important. You have to see lightning or magma or fire or gas or darkness from a human perspective. What do you think of lightning or fire? Because your thoughts on lightning brought the lightning fruit, the Goro Goro no Mi, the Rumble Rumble fruit into existence. It's not so much lightning itself, it's the human perception of lightning. So, in order to become an awakened Logia, you have to embody the human perception of that element, because that is the thing that brought the fruit into existence in the first place. So, with the Rumble Rumble fruit, with the Goro Goro no Mi, what do we know about lightning from a human perspective? Well, it's a terrible, terrible force from the heavens that strikes down without provocation or prejudice and can hit anything or anyone. Now, knowing that, let's look at NL Eniru Inner, the weird Eminem dude from Skypiea, right? Let's look at him. What is he? He is a psychopath with a deity complex that will strike anyone or anything indiscriminately based on little to no provocation. So if you ask me, he very much embodies the principles of the human perception of lightning. Now, let's look at Kizaru. What does Kizaru do? What do we know about Kizaru? Well, Kizaru has a particular brand of justice called unclear justice. So he can either approach a situation very calmly and plainly,
or he can be a goon and just zap everybody with no remorse. So, does that reflect the human experience with light? Well, in a way, because some people and some things experience light as a very soft and nurturing force that provides nourishment and nutrients. It feeds the crops. It makes you feel good when you go outside on a sunny day. Or the flip, you could have a sunburn when you stayed out in the sun too long. Or the light of the sun itself can be focused in the form of a laser if you have a magnifying glass and you want to be mean to some ants. So light is very flexible depending on the situations that it is put in, much like Kizaru. Based on the orders he is given and based on the criteria of the situation, he can be very soft, like a sunny day, or very harsh, like a magnified sun ray torturing ants. Now, let's look at Caesar Clown. What do we know about gas, or at least the human perception of gas? It can be dangerous, it can be all-encompassing, and it can have many different effects and come in many different forms. What do we know about Caesar Clown? He is very creative. He is very versatile in his endeavors, even though his endeavors kind of focus in a particular niche. He's very creative in that niche because while he was able to create Smile Fruits, he was also able to make modifications to the Rumble Ball. So in his niche, he is very versatile. And in being versatile and being quite dangerous with his particular mindset, he does resemble gas. Gas comes in many forms and it can fill many an area with just the slightest opening. So it's very encompassing, very versatile, and very creative in how it will seep into an area. So I do think Caesar Clown does represent what the human perception of gas is. And I did not make one fart joke throughout the entire session. I give myself a round of applause. Now, let's look at some signs of when a Logia is actually awakened. I'm starting to think what we see NL do is more or less an awakening. Because what happens when NL does that final standoff against Luffy, you do see a sash of mastery. And I could believe that Logia are treated in that way because they essentially are the avatar of the element. So what if here in Egghead we finally see what an awakened Logia is? I think what will happen with an awakened Logia, I don't think it's like the climate control thing. I don't think it's that, because we've seen from Ace that's just kind of a weird mental thing that they could just exude on an area. Like, they put effort into it and it just happens. It's been theorized for a while that Crocodile was also doing that with Alabasta. That's why it didn't rain. He perpetuated dryness in areas. And then Boogie Powder just sort of worked in tandem with his fruit. That's why it's very interesting that when he is knocked out in Alabasta, it starts raining. So yeah, which makes a lot of sense because rain would effectively make part of his powers inert. So it makes sense that he would have that sort of capability as Logia and having the relationship that he does to dryness. Same thing with Ace. It didn't snow that day that he appeared in Drum Island. Well, he's exuding the pressure on the area, so it doesn't snow because he's in direct opposition to cold. He is heat. So, with that being said, Kizaru's awakening and any awakening of a Logia, I think, is complete absorption of the intended element. And the reason why I keep bringing this up, and I brought it up in several videos, is because anytime you see an adept Logia really go ham, they're absorbing things that are like their element. Like with NL, he mixed his lightning in with the lightning that was created by the storm clouds he was creating with the Arc Maxim, and he became that giant fat Amaru guy, right? Same thing happens with Caesar Clown. And yes, Caesar Clown does have a Shroud of Mastery. We see this in the Vegapunk cover story thing with Mads, with you see him and Judge and Vegapunk and Queen all as younger men. He does have a Shroud of Mastery around him. So yeah, he absorbs Shirokuni, right? And then he becomes this big entity of gas. And then, of course, Luffy bodies him. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Awakening, much like with Zoan Awakening, is a transformation, but it allows you to absorb things that aren't necessarily things you generated, but are things that are like you. So NL mixing his lightning in, and then that lightning mixing it with the lightning created made him more powerful. Or like Shirokuni. Shirokuni is a gas created by Caesar, but it's not from Caesar. So he was able to eat that and obtain this new bulky form. I think that's going to happen in Egghead with Kizaru, because let me remind you that the hologram generation and the entire dome that's around Egghead is light. It is him. And seeing as how this is being brought up multiple times, if Kizaru is pressed by Luffy, which I think he will be, I think he'll be forced to actually absorb the entirety of the force field, either by mixing his light in with the light of the force field or just eating the force field itself and then turning into this big deity of light. So if Kizaru eats the laser dome called the Frontier Dome that's protecting Egghead, I think he will obtain an awakened state, because an awakened Logia, I think overall, or at least one aspect of it, is consumption and not exertion. We'll talk about the other aspect in a moment. But I think when he does eat the Frontier Dome, he's going to undergo a transformation, much like how NL did at the end of Skypiea when he became that big fat Amaru form, this big fat body of lightning. I think Kizaru's going to undergo a similar transformation, but I think this transformation is going to be a giant yellow monkey. So far, the only yellow monkey technique he's ever had was from a video game called One Piece Gigan Battle, and its name was Amano Iwato, or Cave of Heaven Rock, which is just a kick of light that spawns a yellow monkey made of light. So it's done in a similar way to what Aki Inu and Aokiji do in the canon. You know, Sakazuki, Aki Inu, he makes a giant magma dog. Kuzan has Pheasant Peck, which is just a big bird made of ice. Kizaru hasn't had an attack that displays his namesake in the canon yet. And I think other than him, Green Bull is the only other one that hasn't. Kizaru, I think his awakened state is going to be this big yellow monkey wearing a suit, and that's going to be a sort of sneaky Dragon Ball reference to when the Saiyans from Dragon Ball look at the moon and they become giant monkeys. Or if you want to even deeper cut, Baby Vegeta from Dragon Ball GT, and he was in the video game Dragon Ball FighterZ recently. When he becomes a Uzaru, he becomes a golden Uzaru. Goku also becomes a golden Uzaru, a golden great monkey, and that was the prelude to Super Saiyan 4 for Goku. And then Baby, that was just his ultimate form. He became a giant yellow monkey. Now, another aspect of an awakened Logia, I think, is putting oneself into the things they generate, or making remote versions of oneself through putting consciousness into the element that they generate. So making what they generate more them, generating more of yourself in a weird kind of way. And we've seen this kind of in two parts. One of the most obvious ones is with Karasu, the user of the Soot fruit, because before actually seeing him, we've seen his Soot crows, the crows he generates out of soot. And in those Soot crows, we've seen they've been able to actually speak without him being there. And they've been able to make crow noises, which is kind of funny because that could mean that he was just making crow noises for the heck of it, which is very funny. But regardless, he's actually making these things talk, or they're remote versions of Karasu himself. So he's imbuing himself into his constructs, which is something we have not seen before. We have seen many a Logia make animal constructs like NL or Aki Inu, but none of those constructs have been able to actually speak. So this is a very interesting development. And I think the baseline of that, like I said before, is putting oneself into the element that you generate. This is kind of like with Perona, the user of the Hollow fruit, in which she can see through the ghosts she generates with her ghost network. So in this situation, it's like a Logia kind of adopting some abilities that we see in Paramecia users. Another flip to this, which is more like the avatar state that I was mentioning earlier with Enel in his Amaru form, is this kind of weird incorporeal avatar-like state that some Logias are able to concoct, because we see this in Punk Hazard with Caesar Clown. Caesar Clown, before his initial design was shown off, appears in this weird gaseous state. And in this weird gaseous state, he is neither corporeal or incorporeal, because even though he's a weird cloud of gas, he's able to hold on to a drink and drink from it, and also crush said glass that drink is being held in when he is angry. So that's weird overall, and we haven't really seen that too often. The only thing, again, I can compare it to is Enel's Amaru state, because Enel's Amaru state does appear solid, yet not solid. It appears as a giant body of lightning, but it's no different than how Enel appears normally. It has all of his aspects. Some added details are there, but it still looks like Enel. With Caesar, it's a more weird turn on that, because it doesn't look like Caesar, but it's still gas, and it's just a weird monster man cloud of gas. It's very strange. So I think this just falls back into the whole command of being your element, putting more of yourself into your element. And with that, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Give me your thoughts, though. Hey, yo, new Dofru lore just dropped. Vice Admiral Bluegrass, possibly the best Vice Admiral of our new batch of guys that have dropped on Egghead. But yeah, she has the ability of the Ride fruit, which means as a driver with this ability, she can control anything or anyone regardless of anything else. What is so ridiculous about this is that her first target is the Pacifista Mark III. Mind you, Pacifista Mark IIIs throughout the entirety of this arc have been slaves to authority chip hierarchy, but she overrides that completely and could just use one for her own devices. That in itself is insane to me, because not only is she riding it like a horse, but she's commanding it to do actions, because she commands it to fire on Bonnie. So what does this mean? This means that whether it be a object or a person or perhaps even a construct, she can control it. So that means if she got in a fight with, like, say, Moria, if she got a hold of Doppelman, Moria loses. You ever thought about that? If she got a hold of Daifuku's genie, Daifuku loses. This could even work on homies. Because what I think is going on here is that perhaps she has to insert that handle into a target, because in the chapter we see her holding on to a handle or a rope or something, which I think is the manifestation of the fruit. And when she plugs that into something, then she has control of it as its driver. So with that being said, a lot of the Dofruits whose main ability is a minion to do your bidding, you're out of luck. I think the only one who gets away is possibly Perona, because Perona's ghosts are actually intangible. You can't really touch them. But I don't know. Could this handle latch on to a hollow ghost? Who's to say? This is insane. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on this ability. No, this is one of the stronger mind control abilities in the series, because of the mind controlling Dofruits, there aren't really a lot. Because it's like the cheer fruit that Bella Betty has. It's kind of the hormone fruit. We'll get into that in another video, but it's kind of that, the Daigo fruit that Tama has, and I think the Hobby fruit, but the Hobby fruit is like a weird reverse brainwashing fruit, because it basically brainwashes everyone from the target's existence, but it doesn't necessarily brainwash the target, which is weird. But anyway, this is a crazy power to me. simply because it works on anyone or anything. I wonder, could she do like a Tile Pai Pai sort of situation in which she could put a handle on like a big rock and then ride that rock? Kind of like from SpongeBob, how they were hitched a ride on a rock and used as a car or something like that. What if she could do that to like a boulder? That'd be hilarious. But yeah, I don't see why not. I honestly don't see why not. This is insane to me, because if she could override the authority chip with this fruit, could she override basic physics and just make something like that move? It's a very interesting power in itself, and it just opens up a gateway to a whole bunch of other possibilities. Mind you now, with that being said, if you're a Zoan, you too are out of luck. She can turn any Zoan into a mount. How do you fight this? Honestly, because how is she not an admiral? I guess because it's kind of like a one-trick pony type of Doa fruit, kind of like with the Hobby fruit. It's best used to serve as like a upper minions fruit as opposed to a big boss's fruit. So it's more of like a vice admiral fruit or a officer's fruit rather than a main antagonist fruit, which, I mean, that's kind of lame, but it is kind of the rule of how things have gone over the years. Tama, for example, isn't a big boss character. She is a minion of the allied forces, you could say. Same thing with Sugar, same thing with Bello Betty. Well, Bello Betty, she's a captain of her own like group in the Revolutionaries, but she's not, say, a top dog like I presume Ivankov or Sabo to be. So, it's still really impressive though. I love this power. It's actually amazing. So, this is too the only other fruit. I'm trying to think. No. This is, I think, the third fruit, actually, in the series that has a travel theme to it, because the other two would be the Mark fruit held by Vanderdecken, and then technically the Paw fruit held by Kuma, currently. So, with the Ride fruit, we actually have another sort of traveling fruit. It's not as efficient as the other two, because the other two have done some amazing feats, like Vanderdecken actually did his best Tile Pai Pai impression during Fishman Island. And of course, Kuma's been a plot point with all of his transporting shenanigans with his paw pads. But this is probably the slowest, but still one of the most deadly ones, because I wouldn't say it's as powerful as the Paw fruit, because the Paw fruit is kind of almost running on Toon logic with how efficient it is, whereas it could turn like pain and suffering into tangible matter, which is wild. Whereas this is just deadly in its application because it has no limits, which is a very rare thing, because even the Hobby fruit had limits. It can only affect living beings. This can affect anything. So that by itself is insane to me. I'm just wondering now, what are the drawbacks of this fruit? Perhaps she actually has to mount the target in order to put the handle in. Maybe that's the drawback, which seems like a really weak drawback, which makes me think, I wonder if she was just lazy throughout her entire career. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, how is it that she's not an admiral? Because in her prime, she must have been a very dangerous individual. Or she could be a new recruit. She could be. Because since seeing as how we didn't see her in the pre-time skip. Maybe. But yeah, extremely dangerous ability, and one of my favorites so far. Almost forgot to mention, the Nori Nori no Mi held by Bluegrass is the first Doa fruit to actually reuse the name in the series, because before Bluegrass there was a character from the One Piece premiere show in 2021 who also had a Nori Nori no Mi by the name of Hers. His Doa fruit, however, was the Dance fruit, making him a dance human. But in Japanese, the fruit's name is called the Nori Nori no Mi. And this ability allowed Hers to shoot out a beam, and when the beam hit someone, it forced them to dance until they died. This reminds me of that weird phenomenon way back when, in which I believe women would dance in the town square. It was called the dancing sickness or something like that. But yeah,